This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by high-performing carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide delivers fast, selective, and extended control of aphids in alfalfa and pulses, leaving beneficials like lady beetles to help in the fight. Ask your retailer today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And, of course, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast in Canada, the U.S., or beyond. It is great to have you here, part of the RealAg community. We are broadcasting today from Toronto, Ontario, right in the downtown. Yes, pretty cool. A little bit far from the farm, so to speak. But it is this week is the RealAg team meeting. So all of the RealAg team members from across the country have come together for 3 days of meetings, and it's been a blast. It has been so much fun. Great to see everybody in one place and kind of strategize about the year ahead, do that strategic planning, review of where we've been, where we're going, the goal setting, and all those kinds of things. So, when we talk about things in the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, right, or have some guests on the show talking about business planning, we're doing some of that same stuff ourselves. So it's been a great, inspiring 3 days. Today on the program, we're going to do a RealAg Issues Panel. We got Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, they're right here beside me. So that's going to be a great discussion. We've got the Conservatives in a 20-point lead now over the Liberals. Wow. Yeah. Feels like the gig's up. Yeah. The trend is not the friend of the Liberal Party. We've got the NDP saying no to the carbon tax. Like, what kind of alternative reality are we living in now at this point? We're also going to talk about Bill C-282 that got discussed this week in the Canadian Senate. And as well, the Grain Growers of Canada came up with their policy recommendations for the roadmap to 2050. So we'll talk about some of those as well. If you have any feedback on today's program, and we also have a beef market update. How could I forget the beef market update? Anne Wasko will be with us here today as well. And we've got a product spotlight with SCIC. Jodie Griffin is going to talk about some of those livestock price insurance program options, why you need to be thinking about risk management in this volatile cattle market. Now, if you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can find us across all the social media platforms, or why not call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. We're now going to discuss Pest and Predator podcast. Joining us right now to talk about Season 5 is Dr. Megan Vankowski. She is with AFC in Saskatoon. So what can listeners expect here in Season 5?
Well, a whole bunch of different topics are going to be discussed by entomologists from across Canada. Myself and a couple colleagues, we recorded a podcast about potentially invasive species to the prairies, which are something we want people to be aware of and watch out for. Dr. Maya Evenden is recording a podcast about the ecology of fear and how just the presence of an enemy, of a predator or a parasitoid can impact a pest. It doesn't have to be a direct relationship. It can be indirect. And of course, then we have other podcasts about some specific pests and their interactions with their predators and parasitoids. So the podcast series for 2024 is due to start airing March 18th, and then they'll be bi-weekly after that until the end of May.
At Vaterstad, we aim to be the world's leading partner for outstanding emergence. We're doing that through innovative tillage, planting, and seeding equipment that's optimized for your field conditions and soil types. We also offer industry-leading capacities to help you get the job done in shorter windows of time. It's all designed to give your crop the best start possible so you can maximize yields. Vaterstad, we look forward to growing together.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. It's now time for the beef market update with Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Anne, how are you doing on this fine Friday?
I am good. Good to see you, Shaun.
Good to see you as well. It's great to chat with you. Lots going on in these cattle markets. Definitely not straight up. It's a lot of all over the place, depending on what's happening on a
Yeah.
daily basis in the news for sure. So give us an update on the U.S. cash and cutout.
Well, you're right. Lots of influencing, especially coming from outside noise, and especially continuing to see daily news in terms of the avian influenza, or now the bovine influenza, as you've talked about already. So, but bottom line is the cash market in the U.S. this week's going to end about $2 lower in the south, so that's going to be 182. In the north, we end up trading at 185, which is also a couple bucks lower. The dressed market in the north, 293 to 295 delivered, and that's $2 to $4 lower than last week. So, unfortunately, after making that high a few weeks ago of 189, the market has certainly been, pretty much down each week since then. Really starting with the news back at the end of March on the avian influenza. So that's disappointing. But we talked about 2 weeks ago about, timing is not good to recover at this point in time, and that's exactly how things are playing out. Now, the choice cutout last night, we did see it gain a buck, but I don't think we've got to read too much into it. So it closed at 289.35. We did have smaller kills this past week, Ramadan, and there's some cooler cleanouts being done. So with a smaller kill, smaller production, that often supports the cutout. And I think that's really all that happened there. The one comment I did want to make was on the select. I talk about the choice cutout. There's also a select cutout, and it's only trading $3 back of the choice right now. And I think one of the reasons for that narrow spread is there's some pretty big demand for our lean trim market right now, the 90 trim, as we call it, or the hamburger beef market. And what's happening now with the shorter supply of that type of product with our smaller cow kills in both countries, we've got some of those end cuts getting ground up, and so putting some good strength or good demand on those end meats, and that'll get ground and blended in with some to make those 90s. So the smaller cow kill is certainly, that's less hamburger beef and strong trim prices, and that even feeds right back to the Alberta cow market. I know we're talking about a U.S. select choice product, but the Alberta cow market last week, 172 was the average that Canfax reported. That's another all-time record high for the slaughter cows. So it's just crazy what prices have been doing to respond to it.
And what's happening right now with the basis then for some of these markets?
Yeah, so one of the things so I've talked about the U.S. market's been lower the last few weeks. The Alberta fat cattle market has not. And what's been going on, Shaun, of course, earlier this year, we talked about a very weak basis. There was times we were trading Alberta cattle $25 to $28 back of the U.S. market. Well, Alberta cattle prices were slowly getting more current, and we've got the market was up again this week. So Canfax reported 412 to 415 dressed. That's delivered dressed. When they do come out with their live average later today, I think it's going to be up in the upper 240s. So again, a nice jump on that market. And we've been watching this go on for the last few weeks. So, for example, say 3 weeks ago, we were at a minus, or back in February, we were at a minus 28. This week to the April board with this cash market today, we're going to be plus 3.
Oh,
so what
really?
A big switch from well under to now over the U.S. market. So, and we've had a weaker Canadian dollar. We cracked under 73 today. So, that's also been supportive to this relationship. And then on basis, just to maybe finish that story off, the same kind of trend going on for feeder cattle in Western Canada. We continue to see them narrow the gap to U.S. feeder cattle as well. So in February, Alberta feeders were 27 under the nearby board, and last week they were only 7 under. So, and that's more in line with that 3-year average. So both markets, fats and feeders, have been catching up. We were well back with the U.S. market when we started this year off.
And speaking of comparing Canada to the U.S., we're also sending fat cattle south.
Yeah, and therein also is a factor in how do you improve basis when you've got a very front end loaded supply like we did when we started off January in Alberta. Lots of fat cattle available, so we've seen more not just slaughtered here in Canada, but now seeing more move to the U.S. as well. And it started off, we talked about this data when it came out a while ago, Shaun, was January exports for fats were up 8%. February, we just got that data last week, was up 51%. And the preliminary March data, which we won't get from StatsCan for a bit, but just looking at the weekly data, it's going to be another big number. So we're going to have Q1 was a quarter of really cleaning up and getting cattle moved to all different directions, not just within Canada, but also to the U.S. And that's helped to narrow this basis up as well.
That's why Canada may be tackling that product of USA labeling and not having segregation at the plants. Boy, that's why they're arguing against that label, because of the demand for Canadian fat cattle going to some of those U.S.
especially at times like this. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And so then feeder cattle coming from the U.S. into Canada, I would imagine that has not slowed down.
No, and we got same thing when we got the export data, we got the feeder import data. So feeder imports in February were just over 26,000 head came north. And even when you net out, there was a few feeder cattle went south as well. But even when you net those out, Shaun, we were a net importer of feeder cattle for the month of February to the tune of 19,000 head. So it's still a big number. And so, that continues to just reinforce this two-way trade of live cattle and beef. It's across the board.
Man, it just shows you how important it is. It reinforces it. North American integrated market. Just keep on saying it. Now, preview expectations for the Alberta Cattle on Feed report. What's that going to say quickly before we wrap up?
Yeah, so Canfax will release their report this afternoon. That's for Alberta and Saskatchewan. And my expectations are that, like it was for the 1st of March, so this will be April 1, that it should be down, maybe 2 or 3% from a year ago. Next Friday, the U.S. will release their April 1 on-feed report, and already guesstimates are coming out that they're still going to be 2% above a year ago. So finally starting to see maybe numbers in Western Canada come down, especially these feedlot inventories. And once we do break under a year ago levels, I think we'll stay there for the rest of the year. The feeder supply is going to be just that tight. Yeah,
and you know what? To wrap here, weather has got a lot better, and anybody that's calving in this kind of weather right now feels like they're a little bit they're thankful.
Comparison to the last few years, this has been a great calving season so far. So knock on wood, whatever. Yeah. It's been a great season.
I was struggling with my words there, trying to find how I actually should describe it. I think I hit the nail on the head. Okay, and thanks so much for joining us for this week's Beef Market Update. All the best to you.
Okay, thanks, Shaun. Have a good one.
It's now time for a product spotlight here on RealAg Radio, and we're joined by Jodie Griffin. She is program coordinator for the Livestock Price Insurance Program with the Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation. Jodie, great to chat with you.
It's great to chat with you too, Shaun. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, lots happening in the livestock industry right now. Calving season is always a very, very, very busy one. Today, we're going to talk about, obviously, livestock price insurance and how that has a fit for producers. Give us an update. What's going on with livestock price insurance this year?
Well, livestock price insurance is kind of doing the same thing as what these cattle markets are doing, over this past year. We've experienced some record high coverage for producers to be able to purchase. And I'd really like to focus on the calf program today because there's a deadline to that program, which is June 13th. So I'm just going to kind of cite what's going on this week because calf coverage became available yesterday. It's offered every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But, top coverage on the calf program this past week is trending about 17% higher than where we were last year at this same time. And premium rates, they're trending about the same as what we were last year. And I say that through the lens of premium as a percentage of coverage, because that's how we talk in the insurance world. But it's trending about the same in cost as what we were last year. And that's just referencing the top coverage on that premium table that our producers look at. But I really want to remind our producers that we offer more than one price. It's a premium table that has a variety of prices that's offered. And this year, there is excellent price protection to be had from the top to the bottom of that premium table.
Okay, so if we look at that premium table and we look at some of the volatility out there in the market, those things add up to me about, trying to protect myself, especially if the market goes against me. From your standpoint, why should producers purchase an LPI policy?
And that is a really good question that's been being asked a lot, especially when we've been on this, great ride of high markets. But, listening to you and Anne over the last couple of weeks on those market reports, it has been a stark reminder to us as producers that these markets are volatile and unpredictable. So with avian flu, impacting that dairy sector and causing our cattle futures market to kind of topple over, because LPI is a forward-looking, market-driven program, that type of news also set that back on the price insurance. So to reference back, at the beginning of March, you could buy calf coverage at $394. $394, Shaun. We were saying, if the market was below that on 6-weight steers for the fall run, like in that time frame in the fall, price insurance was going to pay. Well, now we're down to that 366 range. But, even saying that, as I referenced before, that's still 17% higher from where we were last year. And if the message has got to be sent to say anything, it's that now is not the time to get complacent when we're in this type of environment. This tool, this program is as important as we always say it is, but I would say it's even more important, right? We just got a lot of things that are happening there. And when we get into these markets that are this high, we know what that does to the volatility. It drives that volatility just a little bit higher.
Yeah.
Can I add just another thing here too, Shaun? And we hate to have this discussion, but so we've got that event that's just occurred here in the last couple of weeks that's really kind of bolted us into an upright position to be paying attention. The other thing, especially for us up here in Canada, our industry is talking a lot about a topic that we don't like to talk about, and that's foot and mouth disease. And, we don't like to talk about that, but we know that it's a discussion that's being had at every level of industry groups. And I just need to remind these producers that LPI is about the best defense that you can have against a border closure threat. And so if you want to think of that, like, we don't like to think of those things, but LPI was created off of the catastrophic event of BSE, and it's here to protect against those catastrophic events. So when I go back to that top to bottom coverage, that top level down to that bottom, and that always speaks to costs on premium. Premium tends, of course, to be the cheapest at the lowest. If you just want to look at the price insurance this year from that lens, there is, like I said, there is some really good protection out there and we're talking protecting margin. There's times you and I have chatted in the past where it's about protecting losses. We're still talking about protecting some really good margins in the cow-calf sector. So don't ignore the insurance. Yeah.
Well, you hit a lot of things that need to be top of mind when it comes to managing the risk. And, we got a lot of cowboys and cowgirls listening to the show, so to speak, and not a time to just let it ride.
Well, I think to wrap this up, another reminder that I want to give to our producers in this type of environment is price insurance is about establishing a floor price. Sometimes we have to be reminded of that. It's about protecting the down in the market.
Yeah, make sure everybody go to lpi.ca to find out more and get a hold of Jodie and her staff if you have any questions. Hey, Jodie, thanks so much for joining us here today for this product spotlight.
Thank you so much for having me, Shaun. Have a great day.
We'll be right back on RealAg Radio with the RealAg Issues Panel right after this.
Through a growing storm of kosher, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to RealAg Radio, broadcasting from Toronto, Ontario. Here today, we're at the RealAg Summit. The whole team is together and having a really great time, a couple days of meetings, and so it's a really great opportunity to be able to host the panel in person here today. But first, I want to tell you about Koch Agronomic Services. For every acre you work, Koch Agronomic Services has an answer to help, from nitrogen protection to micronutrients and seed enhancers. Discover portfolio solutions designed to solve the problems you face. Find your answers at KochAg.ca. Okay, let's get to the panel as per usual. It's Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, not too far from home.
Absolutely not, and lovely to be here in Toronto. We've had a wonderful couple days. It's great to see everybody who came from afar to join us here, and we even got a Blue Jays game.
That was fun.
It was pretty good.
Yes.
I had a foot-long hot dog. It was great.
There are some other ballparks that make bigger ones, but the Schneider hot dog that you had...
delightful.
Yep.
Yeah.
Canadian product, I'm sure, in that
probably.
hot dog. We never checked, but
I'm pretty sure.
We'll run on that assumption.
Yeah.
Also, Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, Blue Jays game was a lot of fun.
It was. The renos that they made to the ballpark, I know they made some changes last year, but they made a bunch more when it comes to the seating and around the field this year, and the ballpark looks updated. I think Blue Jays fans are going to enjoy this for the coming season. The team has yet to be determined in terms of their what their capability is, but the ballpark is looking nice after some upgrades.
Yeah, when in the summertime, when that roof is open, that is going to feel like, and it feels like a real ballpark now, but when that roof is open, it's really going to feel like a ballpark. They have whoever did the design of that, they need to get like a key to the city or something. Do we even do that anymore?
I don't know. Maybe Toronto does.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like it used to feel like a big piece of concrete, and now feels like an actual real ballpark. It's amazing. So encourage all of our listeners, if you do enjoy baseball, try to plan a trip go to Rogers Center. I almost called it Sky Dome there. Go to Rogers Center.
Showing your age.
Yes, exactly. and check it out, because it is very, very nice. Okay, lots of issues to discuss here. I guess let's start off. Bank of Canada, as expected, Kelvin, held interest rates at 5%. Basically, we've been at 5% since last July. The Canadian numbers, though, looking like a cut is somewhat in our near future.
Right now, the market is assuming a cut is coming in June, a 25 basis point cut in June. It's not. Tiff Macklem, the Bank of Canada governor, wouldn't say that it's happening for sure, of course, but he didn't rule it out, and the market is, most of the players are expecting or bracing for kind of planning for a 25 basis point cut in June. There will, of course, be two more inflation reports, monthly inflation reports before that, a labor report as well, so some more data to come in, but June is the next Bank of Canada decision, and it's expected that they'll be making the first cut then, which is contrary to the direction the Federal Reserve is expected to go in the U.S.
Yeah, I heard an interview with Larry Summers in the U.S., and he didn't necessarily say that I believe they're going to do this with the Federal Reserve, but he made a case that the U.S. could have another rate increase coming.
I shouldn't say, Bank of Canada not moving contrary to the U.S., but I think most people are expecting the Federal Reserve to hold longer than Bank of Canada at this point. So a bit of divergence.
Whoa. I know.
Whoa.
I know.
I hate to go back and hold people to what happened a couple weeks ago, but truly, I feel a little bit vindicated.
I was just, as Kelvin was talking, I was like, oh no, Shaun's going to have to pull out the old...
I was right. Yeah.
So, yes.
Hate to say I told you so.
Yeah, we talked about
Find
this.
the tape.
Find the tape. We talked about this not that long ago, where Kelvin and I were pretty much, the U.S. has to lead on this. But the way the numbers are coming in, absolutely, it does appear at least that Canadians may see a reduction in that overnight rate before the U.S. Now, we've got a lot to go through before any of that happens, but at least from this month's trend, from this month's data, Shaun, you may be right.
Shaun must have had a crystal ball knowing that inflation in the U.S. would come in higher than everybody else thought this week.
It could also do with the fact that I listened to an abnormal, unhealthy amount of Bloomberg radio.
It is an unhealthy amount.
That also could be a problem.
You're right. Yeah, it could be a factor.
Now, let's talk about this. There's an impact if that scenario does happen. Canadian rates go higher. That means our dollar is going to go higher, right? And that could hurt that less beneficial to exporters, which has an impact as well on things like cattle or pork producers, Kelvin.
Yeah, exactly. A stronger Canadian dollar often isn't great news for Canadian agriculture in terms of exports being so important for a large portion of our industry. At the same time, I think there is also some analysis that shows that the sensitivity in the currency market to that difference in rates is maybe less than it used to be.
Yeah.
So it's something that the Bank of Canada will certainly be factoring into its decision as to whether to actually make that first rate cut in June.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's something we're very. I've been following this very, very closely, and just it's very fascinating to see how they make the decision not to move too fast, not to move too slow. Everyone's being, many times hypercritical. The Bank of Canada's got to do this; they can't do that. It's be interested to be in the room a little bit and have some of those discussions. Okay, we've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got to talk about C-282, that supply managed bill in the Senate, and we got to find out what is going on with the growth of solar grazing sheep in the United States. We've got our resident solar grazing expert right here on our panel, and she's going to tell us what Canada is not doing when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Does your N stabilizer contain an active ingredient load high enough to be agronomically effective? If not, it could be costing you time and money. If you're putting down a nitrogen stabilizer, put your trust in Koch Agronomic Services. Solutions like Super U, Tribune, and Anvil. Each delivers high active ingredient concentrations that low-rate products just can't match. Compare how imitator products stack up to agronomically effective solutions at defendyourn.ca.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Let's talk about the pre-emergent soil active herbicides Valterra EZ and Fierce EZ from New Farm. Get ahead of hard-to-kill weeds. Spray after spring thaw for up to 8 weeks, Lyndsey. 8 weeks of extended weed control this spring. Find out more about New Farm products by going to newfarm.ca. One of my favorite New Farm ads they had was "Feel the Burn."
That was a good one.
That was a good one. Yep, great work by Holly. Okay, let's dive into the Senate this week. The discussion, I guess, fine. We've been waiting for it. The Senate's got to deal with 282, and by some of the transcripts I read of some of the commentary, it feels like this one maybe faces some challenges. It's just not going to breeze through the Senate as maybe one side hoped. Is that a fair way to put it, Kelvin?
I think we're starting to see things potentially tilt in the direction of it having a really hard time getting through the Senate.
Yeah.
Which is something that export-focused sectors of Canadian agriculture is something that they want. They don't want this to become legislation, which is, of course, we go back a few months when it came to Bill C-234.
Let's rewind the tape.
Again, this is a throwback episode.
Then we had issues with the Senate interfering with the will of the House of Commons.
Right.
But here, it's looking, we saw Conservative Senate leader Don Plett yesterday speaking up again against it, saying that he has major concerns, and he represents an area, comes from an area in southeast Manitoba that is heavy on supply managed farms, as well as a lot of pork production as well, so export focus there. But he expressed some major concerns in the Senate yesterday. And
he may get a bit of a mixed reaction during parade season in the summer when he's sitting on the back of a car and waving to everybody.
Yeah, it is one though where I think at the grassroots level, I think a lot of supply managed farmers understand the logic of why this
100% agree.
Ahead.
Yeah,
I'm getting the emails from them.
It's maybe not what's being said in meetings between the groups that represent them and politicians, but I do think that and this I think it's going to have a hard time moving ahead. It's been stuck now at second reading in the Senate since late September. Here we are, middle of April.
Yeah.
It's brought back for debate again yesterday for the first time in 2 months. I don't see it moving ahead quickly, and it still hasn't been referred to committee stage, which is where there could be amendments made to it to make some changes.
What I find interesting, Lyndsey, when you listen to some of the senators talk yesterday, it reminded me about when I would talk about 282 through the winter meeting season, about trying to talk to farmers about the bill and some of the concerns that I have. They did the same sort of prefacing. I'm not making a comment about like pro or against. I'm talking about the impact specifically of what this bill would do. And of course, this bill C-282 is the bill that would essentially try to legislate and it would be the legislation to prevent Canadian trade negotiators from giving up any trade market access going forward in future trade deals, like if in 2026 if we ever have to renegotiate the NAFTA agreement. It's interesting that they follow that same kind of like disclaimer.
Right. Well, and because what we hope the Senate in that discussion or any politicians that are commenting on this are trying to separate, a political bent to the actual realities of trade and trying to separate, their opinion of what this bill could or could not do potentially to our relationship with the U.S. or to our relationship at the negotiating table, and trying to bring it back to a discussion on exactly that. Is this really legislation that benefits Canada as a whole, and trying to set aside it really being about promoting supply management or not, because realistically, yes, that's sort of what we saw it roll out as, but could we make this about what's actually good legislation versus supply management support?
There are still ways that supply management can be protected in trade negotiations, including the USMCA renegotiation. Yeah. So that's why I think that there are ways, like that argument could be made here, that there are ways we can protect supply management as is, and not have this bill go through where we tie our hands in some ways when it comes to trade negotiations.
Yeah.
Why couldn't the House of Commons had this sober conversation?
Well, because they're voted for.
That is part of it, exactly.
That is.
So this is where
it is political.
The
in
fact
the
that senators aren't elected is they do have a little bit more free reign in terms of what they can say, and don't have to worry about re-election in ridings where supply management carries a lot of power.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, against my better judgment, we're going to talk about sheep.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm marking this day on the calendar, Shaun. I'll be honest.
This is so truthfully, I have been following this story because it has come up in numerous mainstream publications. There's an article this week in the Financial Times. Bloomberg has published numerous stories about this. This is the growth. Wall Street Journal. Huge growth in solar grazing of sheep in the United States. This is the combination of solar energy, green energy, and agriculture. Lyndsey, you are a solar grazer yourself. We got a great video up on RealAgriculture.com under our Profitable Practices series, showcasing some of the things that you and your partner Chris are doing on your farm. This is kind of the combination of, like I said, agriculture and energy. The Canadian industry not booming. from a growth perspective, the U.S. industry, though, is growing at a rapid rate. Why the differences?
Well, a few things. And so where a lot of this attention in the media is coming from is that the American Solar Grazing Association, ASGA, it's an organization been around less than 5 years because that's how new this is. They just completed a census that tried to get a handle on just how much solar grazing is happening, and it's had exponential growth in the past couple of years. So we now have over 80,000 sheep grazing on 100,000 acres of solar in the U.S., which is pretty amazing. And honestly, it's set to just continue, at least for the next 3 to 5 years. And they're facing some of the similar challenges we do in Canada. There are a few of us. Ontario has about 10 producers that are doing solar grazing. There are some in Alberta as well. And so it does happen in Canada, but there's a few differences. One, we weren't included in the census, so we don't have a solid numbers as far as, and we tried to participate, but they said they couldn't do it. But we tried. We're not paid as much as in the States. However, the opportunity still exists here. And I think there is a pretty significant cultural difference in some ways. I have been a part of ASGA since the beginning. We have been solar grazing since the fall of 2017. So we've been doing this quite some time and are heavily involved in this organization as well. And what we find in Canada, and yes, money is part of it, but it's a lot of work. It's very labor intensive to do solar grazing. You don't just turn the sheep out, let them be, and come collect them at the end of the summer. It's a lot of cross fencing. It's a lot of managed grazing. It's a lot of relationship management. It's dealing with contracts. It's dealing with safety and all these things that honestly farmers aren't always the best at because they've never had to do it. They've never worked for someone else or with someone else that closely necessarily. Also, there's a lot of sheep in barns in Canada, and barn sheep aren't solar sheep. So will we see it continue to grow in Canada? Absolutely.
Should we see?
Absolutely. Okay. We have a huge potential. So 2 of the companies that we work with personally both have hundreds upon hundreds of solar acres that they want sheep in. And we probably get a phone call every week to 2 weeks of someone saying, I'd love to do this. But they either have, 25, 50 sheep, or they have no sheep, or they have. So we are still at a point where, the people that want to do it aren't the people that own the sheep. And so we have a problem in Canada as to making the most of it. But the opportunity is still here. Absolutely.
When you say cultural issue, what do you mean? Is it like?
Well, I think it's manifold. We've had examples of solar grazing, like in Alberta, just recently, some examples of it not going well, and that was very much producers that turned the sheep out, didn't check on them every day, didn't have necessarily guardian dogs there all the time, and it went poorly. It's a very different type of raising sheep. So that there's a learning curve. So there's a practice thing, but also, Chris and I personally have been trying to help these companies and help farmers get into some of these solar sites, and part of it is it is a lot of work. And if you're already set up in a barn and you don't necessarily want to grow, then why would you take it on? Now, I will tell you, it's more profitable. You get paid to graze. Like it is a profit stream. Right. It's a diversification for your farm, but it's not easy. You're farming in the public eye. You're farming with, underneath panels, and you have to have a complete change of mindset, and that's not easy. So,
and I'm not going to be an expert in solar grazing at all, but I do find that there are parallels where sometimes are we a little bit too comfortable, Kelvin? Like we're a little bit slow to the. Like when I ask about culture, I actually thought of, well, that's kind of the Canadian way. We're a little bit, we talk about the idea first, and we have an opportunity. Like some talk about this, like with gene editing, with plant breeding. Canada was one of the first countries talking about it, but one of the last to actually make it happen, right? And is this a Canadian issue?
There might be a cultural thing too, where I think in Canada we're maybe a little bit less aggressive or bold or confident, maybe more risk adverse. Yeah. Yes, and a lot of that I think has to do with the size of our market and just the scalability in Canada and the way our geography works and the way our population is scattered across such a narrow band of the country, you don't have large market. The scalability isn't always there when it comes to opportunities like this in Canada, and so. But there's also something to be said about the U.S. just even. The American attitude on the global stage of being a leader and
let's go get it.
Let's go get it.
Let's go.
And let's pursue something. And here's an idea. We're all in. And sometimes I would say the U.S. in some files has gone too far. In some, there's examples of that where the pendulum goes too far and there has to be a correction.
Hemp.
Yeah,
that'd be a good one.
Yeah, exactly. Hemp would be one. There'd be many examples if we took time to get into it. But it is. I think there is a cultural thing, and some of that is just driven by the size of our market, but also just the Canadian mentality on the world stage. I think would be an example too of have this. We'd rather be nice and not super aggressive and not take big chances. We like to be safe.
Yeah, I've had a few people that have sent texts and said about plant proteins, for example. Merit Foods fails.
That's another example where Canada, I think, was ahead on a bunch of areas, but now with the Inflation Reduction Act and all the incentives in the U.S., we're quickly losing ground there in that area as well.
And the response from a lot of people is, I told you this was a dumb idea.
Yeah.
Right? We have a little bit of that.
So I think some of this also goes back to government and the attitudes of bureaucrats and the mentality in government. Canada has a very risk-averse bureaucracy, where the U.S. actually has that built into the mandate of some of its federal departments and agencies to promote and grow and expand, whereas in Canada we're all about basically maintaining and preserving in many ways, it seems.
Yeah,
and so I think that's also a big part. That's where this solar grazing going mainstream and getting all this attention 7 years after Lyndsey and Chris started doing it, it also fits with the Biden administration and what Tom Vilsack, the Ag Secretary in the U.S., has been talking about when it comes to new revenue streams for farmers and getting in on the renewable energy growth in renewable energy and how that's a future revenue stream or potential for American farmers and saving the family farm and all that type of thing. So I think the U.S. it fits with U.S. government priorities right now too.
Yeah. So and to that point, so there's actually a name for food production and solar on the same acre. It's called agrivoltaics. And just to throw it in there, it's not just sheep. They are growing crops in between panels. They're growing vegetables under panels. It's more than just sheep grazing, but sheep grazing is one of the ones that's happening at a very large scale.
Okay, so that's the flagship. Okay,
we're
going to take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio, including, the Conservatives. They put a new number on the board, the biggest lead they have had over the Liberals yet, according to a new poll from Abacus Data. And we'll talk about that when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground. We are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. Important notice for grain farmers. Pay attention, everybody. The Canadian Grain Commission has revoked the licenses of Zegers Seed Inc., also known as Zegers Canada. If this company owes you money for grain deliveries, call 1-800-853-6705 immediately, ASAP. This is a message from the government of Canada. So Zegers Canada or Zegers Seed Inc. Okay, quickly, the Conservatives they keep on getting a bit bigger lead over the Liberals. Things not going well for the Liberals. 20 points, Kelvin. 20.
Yeah, this is the biggest lead that we have seen so far from the Conservative Party of Canada in polling from Abacus data. At least Abacus comes out with regular poll reports, and the Conservatives up at I was going to pull these numbers up in front of me, but I don't have them right here right now.
Well, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Committed vote intention,
Yes.
44% Conservative.
44. Yes, you got it there.
44%, 24% Liberal.
24% Liberal.
Yeah.
Wow.
17% NDP. So the NDP have actually declined after almost, over a year in that 18 to 20% range. They're now down to 17. Liberals at 24, and like you said, Conservatives 20 points higher right now, up to 44%. That's the highest that they've had so far.
If I'm the Conservatives, I don't say another word.
And this is after
18 months.
This is after 2 or 3 weeks of the Liberals making billion-dollar announcements, leaking everything that's coming in the federal budget next week.
Fantastic point.
It's this is so Liberals have actually been controlling some of the news cycle with those announcements the last while, and yet here we are with the Conservatives still growing their lead and that gap increasing.
Go ahead.
So my question then, and we all listened to a podcast this week that brings this into question, is this not a pretty clear signal that either what the Liberals are doing Canadians don't love, or they don't love Justin Trudeau, and will the Liberals listen? Because that's just it. They've been trotting out everything that's going to be in the budget, unlike where there's a lockup and, we wait for budget day to find out this unveiling. Now we've had, almost a campaign style of what's all going to be in there, and the gap just widens.
I think they blew past the opportunity. The gap is 20. There's 20 points. They had who wants to step up to be the leader now?
Yeah.
So you could be the sacrificial lamb in the election, and set the table for the next person. I think they've blown past it.
So does Trudeau stay on just to be this sacrificial lamb?
Sorry. Hey, your ego got in the way, buddy.
Yeah. Should have gone a while
ago. And you
ago.
listen to some of the interviews he's doing, he's still in denial that, like, in terms of acknowledging some of these issues that Canadians are clearly raising, he's pointing the finger elsewhere, and it seems like the reality that him and the people around him are in right now is not in touch with the people on the street here on the sidewalk in Toronto.
Yeah, it's kind of like how Brian Mulroney finished, let's be honest.
Yeah. What was it? Ended up with two
seats.
Right. So we'll see how that goes. Different reasons, but perhaps same outcome.
But
yeah.
Look at Kim Campbell. Look what happened to Kim Campbell. Do you want to be Kim Campbell? Right. I wouldn't want to be.
No,
you got to be prime minister.
And even in terms of recruiting, we talked. I think I mentioned this last week as well. Liberals this is the time to be recruiting candidates for the next federal election. Who's going to want to run? And even current members of Parliament who are seeing the writing on the wall when it comes to their ridings are going to have some tough decisions here.
When the gig's up in your policy, when the NDP says they're no longer in support of the consumer carbon tax, now you're like, what are we living? Like, what is it getting colder out there? What's going on?
What just happened?
Yeah, the New Democrats backed the Conservative motion in the House of Commons on Wednesday that Trudeau sit down with the premiers within the next 5 weeks.
Come on, he met with them in 2016.
And we've had 2 or 3 elections on the carbon tax since then, apparently.
Apparently.
Yeah, and then also yesterday, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh in a speech at the Broadband Institute talked about he doesn't see the consumer carbon tax as something that is necessary going forward. So it's certainly a change in messaging and tone there, distancing themselves from the Liberal Party, which I think we're going to see more of. The NDP at some point have to play their card of we don't back the Liberals.
Right.
They have to do that before the next federal election. Otherwise, voters are going to just say, what's the difference between the NDP and Liberal, and why are we going to vote for the third place party? Then if there's no difference, we'll vote for second place.
You're also backstopping a lame horse at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So at some point we have to see some separation.
You know what we do to lame horses.
Yeah.
The cynical take on this, of course, is that they won't do that before, I believe it's February of next year when the pensions kick in at full amount. For
Kelvin likes to bring it back to when Jagmeet Singh gets his full pension.
Well, there are incentives for politicians.
Absolutely, there are.
An MP's pension is a noteworthy incentive.
That's right.
On an individual basis. So, and there are a bunch of MPs in that situation.
Grain Growers of Canada, we got to finish up here, but the Grain Growers of Canada rolled out their 10 policy recommendations for the roadmap to 2050. And what was very interesting, and I'll give our team credit here, notice right away the net zero component of that roadmap gone.
Gone.
I asked Kyle Larkin about that, Lyndsey, and I kind of I don't know. I feel like sort of the ship has sailed on that. You said, why does it have to be by 2050? It could be by 2035. Mm-hmm. I had somebody else tell me there's no way the grain industry gets to net zero without other industries being a part of it.
Right.
Yeah, anyway.
So and to a certain point, I think that net zero is a buzzword, right? It's something that people...
Or it was when this was originally rolled out 2 years ago.
And a lot of companies jumped on board. A lot of companies make that claim even now. I'm kind of surprised by the things you find that have net zero on them or carbon neutral or whatever. And so it did sort of gain in popularity. But at the same time, you could take it the other way and say, well, maybe net zero, maybe we're going to go past it. Maybe, they've got sites or they could argue that we're going to actually be a carbon sink. And so net zero isn't enough. Like, there's ways you could spin it, but I think realistically it doesn't have, the word maybe doesn't have as much
cachet.
Punch as it maybe did 4 years ago or something like that. So it is interesting for sure, and I guess we see where it goes, but not maybe entirely surprising.
Kelvin, what happens right now where you do have a government that is really, really struggling? They don't look like they're going to be the next government whenever the election is. Is it wasted lobbying time, or are you setting the seeds today for the next government?
Well, what we just talked about when it comes to the poll, what the polls are saying, and the Liberals trailing by 20 points, I think that is also in the background when Grain Growers of Canada and these groups have developed this roadmap to 2050 recommendations that they released this week. I think in many ways they're trying to prepare for a scenario where there could be a change in government, and of course net zero wouldn't be as much of a buzzword or potentially as high a priority for a conservative government under Pierre Poilievre. So, yeah, I think there is some anticipation. There's certainly a lot of cultivation of those relationships, fostering of those relationships with opposition MPs at this time, because, yes, those are future cabinet ministers if there's a change in government, and future decision makers. You want to have a good relationship with them at this point and have that influence going forward. There's a lot of that happening already.
Yeah, and one of the things that, it hadn't got to the stage yet, I guess, but I'm very curious, if the government was to implement one or all 10 of the policy recommendations, what's the actual, what is the cost?
Right.
And what do we need in terms of dollar expansion with some of these programs?
Yeah.
That was a part that Kyle wasn't able to provide.
As for the recommendations that they made, I think they were all things that
we've heard about before.
The vast majority of Canadian agriculture would agree with, and of course, there are many stakeholders on board with the road to 2050. Expanding research in plant breeding, both public and private. Expanding research on agronomic practices. Expanding research into machinery. More broadband and better cell service in rural Canada. All those types of things.
None of it earth-shaking.
No, but I think it's definitely, putting pen to paper, making a list, and it does. We are, not.
Those are important things.
These are important things, and we are heading into, within a year, an election that this becomes a good sounding board and leaping off point for messaging, with potential new, exactly that, MPs, whatever. Not having money attached to it, maybe brings up a couple questions, but they're not making a budget.
Yeah, and I asked a few people about it, and they were like, not surprised there wasn't money attached. So I did some follow up on that.
Yeah,
and this is enough to have the conversation. Mm-hmm. You don't need, in some cases, don't share more information than you need to, kind of thing, to accomplish your goal.
Good to see farmers in Ottawa.
Yeah,
talked about that needs to happen.
How many meetings did they met with over 30 MPs one day?
Something like that.
It's busy.
Yeah. A lot of scotch. Okay, that's all the time we have today for RealAg Radio. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or, of course, call the RealAg feedback line.
Do it.
Why not? 855-776-6147. You dial that number, press the number 3, and you leave us a voicemail. We don't even put you on the air live. Come on. You can do it. 855-776-6147. Thanks so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we'll, of course, chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by high-performing carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide hits aphids hard with effective, selective, extended control. It also has activity on lygus and tarnished plant bugs. Ask your retailer today.